Hey guys, today we're taking a look inside the color grade for my friend Joe Simon's beautiful sci-fi short film, The Volunteer. Joe wrote, directed, and starred in this film in the midst of COVID-19, working within the constraints of social distancing to create a poignant and deeply resonant film. I'm really proud of what we were able to accomplish with the color grade, and I'm super excited to give you guys a look under the hood. So let's dive in. So with Joe in Austin and me in Los Angeles, our entire collaboration took place remotely. And in our initial emails and Zoom chats, Joe made it really clear that he wanted to go for a full-strength photochemical look, which I'm always game for. And in that early stage, we talked about a lot of different films, including Interstellar and The Tree of Life and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And these conversations really helped us to zero in on the kind of contrast and colorimetry and overall texture that we wanted to create in The Volunteer. And once we were on the same page creatively, I was ready to start grading. So let's take a look at how I did that. So let's take a look at the final Davinci Resolve project for The Volunteer. This project represents all of the grades and adjustments that we made to get to our finished product, but I've turned most of that stuff off for the moment so that we can walk back through the process from the beginning and get a sense for how this process went. So the first thing that I'm going to do with any new project is I'm going to set the table for myself in terms of my color management. So in the case of my primary material for this film, which is Arri Alexa, I first need to map myself from my camera color space, Arri Log C, into my working color space, which is ACES CCT. And that is going to work like so. I'm going to go to my ACES transform node here and turn it on, and as you can see, I'm going from Alexa into ACES CCT color space. Next, if I go to my timeline grade and look at my output node here, when I turn this on, I'm now going to be mapping from ACES CCT into my Rec 709 display space. So I've now got a full pipeline set up to get me from my camera to my display space, and I have room in the middle to do all of my grading in a unified color space. Next up, I want to start to develop my look for this film, the overall contrast and texture and color palette that is going to define the way each type of material looks. So the most important look is going to be the look for the type of material that we're seeing right here for the Arri Alexa footage. We're going to see in a moment that this film also features some drone kind of surveillance footage, which requires a different treatment, as well as some flashback material, which again is going to require a different and modified look. But the most important stuff is going to be this Arri material. So that's where we're going to start. And all of these looks are going to be built here in the group post-clip grade section so that I can do different look stacks for each group of material. So starting here with the Arri material, we're going to work our way from right to left and look at the most prominent and then drill down into the most nuanced, most fine detailed aspects of this look. So first up, the most noticeable thing is definitely going to be our overall print look. This is an instance of my colloid print DCTL, and as you can see, it's giving me my foundation of creative contrast and colorimetry and an overall kind of preferential color palette. So flipping that on and off again, you can sort of see that across the board on all of my Arri material, it's already slotting me into a really good place. And this plugin, as well as its implementation in this timeline, is really inspired by the color timing approach to filmmaking, which is the way that we did post-production on our images prior to digital intermediate. You carefully selected a final print stock, and everything got printed to that print stock, and that's what defined your contrast and your color palette and the global variables that define the look of your film. So in this case, I have my sliders that I can modulate to anywhere I like for the overall contrast, for the split toning, which is, how much cool into the shadows, how much warm into the highlights, and for my cube as well, which is that sort of preferential color palette that I mentioned. But in this case, because we are doing a traditional photochemical approach, I wanted to leave all of those things at full strength. And in terms of the physical print stock, I decided to go with a Kodak 2383. It's a great looking print stock that stood the test of time. We've seen it on hundreds of great looking movies, and I thought it was a great fit for The Volunteer. So the print stock is probably the most important piece, certainly the most noticeable piece in our look stack here. Next up, a close second, is going to be our grain. If I go full screen on this image right now, you'll see that even though I have this print layer doing its thing now, the image is still quite clean and quite modern in terms of its texture. That's not a good or a bad thing, it's just what's happening with the image right now. So if I want to get more of an analog photochemical vibe, I need to drop my grain texture into the mix. So I'm going to do that here. And you're going to see that texture is immediately going to pop on, and I've got this nice high quality dancing grain pattern that's happening on my image. And underneath it, I've also got some softening happening, because it's an important thing to remember when you're working with grain, that in the real world, anytime you have grain, which is coming either from a film negative or a film positive, a print, or some combination of those, you're always going to have the grain be the most resolute, the sharpest component of that frame, and everything underneath it, the actual frame contents, are going to be just a little bit softer. So I've got a layer of softening happening underneath my actual grain texture, which I think is a really important detail that often gets missed. Moving on to our left here next, we're going to look at our halation, which is more subtle than our grain or our print, but it's a really important ingredient for helping to cue a photochemical look, and it really can add a lot to a frame. So let's go full screen here and have a look at this little specular highlight on the hazmat suit there, and watch what happens when I turn this on. We're getting just a nice, soft, warm diffusion coming out of that hotspot now, and this is going to be consistent for any specular highlights that we see anywhere throughout this film from this point forward. This is a behavior that you get out of all film negative, and it's something that helps to really subtly cue that we're in a movie shot on film. So while it might not be as noticeable as the grain or the print stock, it's a nice contributor to the overall flavor of the movie. And then finally, let's have a look at the last ingredient in our look layer, and that's my weave node, which is happening right here. This is meant to mimic gate weave, or the movement that you get when you're running a film print through a film projector, and the sprockets and pins are lining up just slightly differently. The registration of the print is hitting just slightly differently with each frame that moves through the projector, so you end up getting this slight vertical up and down movement that's going to be easier to spot in a minute once this plays through and gets itself running at 24 frames. Again, it's a really subtle thing that you probably wouldn't notice unless I was pointing it out to you, but it really helps to cue this traditional photochemical vibe that we wanted to embrace in all of its detail for the volunteer. So we've now looked at the overall look stack for the hero camera material, and let's go now and look at some of the other looks that we built to complement this main look. The next one I want to show you is the drone stack, and the main thing here honestly was just texture. We really deprived it actually of a lot of the ingredients that we just looked at in our hero look. So there's no film print curve, there's no halation, but what there is if I zoom into this image for you, you're going to see that when I turn this layer on and off, I've got a nice sort of pixel texture going on in my image now. So this was an important ingredient to add for this drone footage, because the idea is it's this, kind of aerial surveillance automated material, and adding that texture really helped differentiate it from the more filmic stuff that we see with the Airy, and to give it its own character. Next, let's go over and look at the flashback material, which is living in its own group and has a stack that's closer to what we were looking at with our hero source material, but with a couple of important tweaks. First, on the print side, I've switched my curve to a Kodak 2395, which is a much lower much more kind of archival feeling contrast curve. You can compare, this is our 2383 that we have on our hero material, and here's the 2395, so it's a good bit flatter. And then if I go in and look at the grain, it's blown up to the size that you would get on a super 8mm gauge. So all of this material has more of an archival, sort of like found footage vibe, as opposed to pristine 35mm film. And the other variation going on with our grain here is, just as the grain is getting larger, the underlying image is getting a little bit softer because of the resolving power that you would have with this film format at that size. So when I turn this off, you can see our image looking like so. And when I turn it on, the softening is much more pronounced than, say, in our main hero look there. Again, we just wanted this material to have a more nostalgic vibe than it came in looking like, which is a much more clean kind of contemporary look. So those are our three main looks, and those three looks are really where I focused most of the energy of my first pass. And because I felt confident that I was on the same page with Joe in terms of where we wanted things to go, and we'd had conversations at length about how to work up these looks, by the time we got into our individualized grading, we were able to keep things really, really simple and take more of that kind of color timing approach, where my main priorities really boil down to my exposure, my color temperature, and the way I'm guiding the eye within the frame. So we could look at a frame like this as a great example. I'm going to turn off my entire clip level grade stack here and now turn it back on. This one's definitely an improvement, but I'm not doing anything very drastic. Most of the look and the feel of this frame is coming from the look that we built at the group post clip level, as opposed to here at the individual clip level. So let's just walk through the node stack and get a feel for what's happening. So we're looking at a fixed node tree here that's primarily driven by my colloid tools, the DCTL plugins that I make that allow me to make the kind of filmic adjustments that I tend to want to make in most of my projects, certainly in a project like this. So this is a fixed node graph, so sometimes we're going to see instances of these tools which aren't doing anything at all. They're just there at the ready for if I want to use them. So first up, we're just doing a little nudge of exposure, just dropping things about a quarter of a stop. Kelvin is not moving at all. Our color temperature is not moving at all. We're making a small contrast adjustment, just opening things up ever so slightly more toward the bottom. Making a little balancing adjustment here, nudging things toward green. And then we may be doing a little saturation. Nope, that's holding. The only other thing really going on in this frame is this special that's happening on the clouds and on the ship up top. So because we were really happy with the footage and with the look that we built, we were able to go in and focus on really small details that I feel like really enhance the frame and help elevate and tell the story in a better way. So here's an example over here, like in this frame. For the baseline look, we're cooling and dropping exposure on things overall. And then we just got to do a couple of fun things like this here, where we're drawing some extra visual attention onto the water coming out of the shower head here, getting a little bit more contour going on there. And then doing a little special on the window over here to knock it down even further and cool it off even further and really sell this kind of like slightly under, more moody, cool vibe that we ended up landing on with this frame. Here's another good example here. In this frame, we're doing virtually nothing except softening contrast by a couple of points and then doing just a little bit of dodging on frame right to draw the viewer's attention a bit more to our hero at frame left. So that's a good overview of the type of strategy and approach that we took to grading the volunteer. We set that initial look for each of the pieces of source material, tried to give each its own texture and flavor that felt appropriate to the story and to the type of camera that it would have initially been acquired on. And then we really just went to town on making little tiny tweaks and adjustments rather than going clip by clip and retooling things with every new shot. I hope you guys have enjoyed getting an inside look at my grade for The Volunteer. If you want to see the finished film, I'm going to leave a link to it in the description. And if you have questions about anything that I covered today, feel free to leave those down in the comments. I want to thank Joe again for an awesome collaboration on this project, and I want to thank all of you guys for tuning in today. We'll see you next time.